You may recall that back on January 4th, then President-elect Joe Biden pledged to voters that if Democrats gained control of the Senate, $2,000 checks would immediately go out to people who need them. But now the Democrats actually have that power. Been a little bit of a shift in that narrative. Biden recently revealed that he's open to further negotiating the terms of those checks.
Well, I propose that because it was bipartisan, I thought it would increase the prospects of passage. The additional $1,400 in direct cash payment to folks. Well, there's legitimate reason for people to say, do you have the lines drawn the exact right way? Should it go to anybody making over X number of dollars or why? I'm open to negotiate those things.
So joining us to discuss is Biden's backpedaling is former National Press Secretary for the Sanders campaign, contributing editor at Current Affairs and host of the Bad Faith podcast, our friend Briahna Joy Gray. Good to see you, Briahna. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to see you guys.
Absolutely. So what do you make of this? Already revising and being willing to negotiate. It just is really mystifying, Briahna, because he promised in those Georgia elections that people would be getting a $2,000 check. And maybe they are banking on people forgetting that promise, people willing to give them, a couple of months in order to deliver. But Nancy Pelosi found out the hard way that people will have, they will remember whenever you play games with this money.
Yeah, it's bad enough that $2,000 checks has now become $1,400 checks. Mm-hmm. But now further conversation about means testing that amount even more when 8 million people have been plunged into poverty over the last 6 months of 2020 is really quite unconscionable. And that's before you add on to the fact that the CARES Act back in March was one of the largest upward transfers of wealth to the rich in American history. Nobody was talking about making sure the money was perfectly targeted as we were pumping money into corporations where small businesses and individuals were getting very, very little of that material benefit. Now, all of a sudden, Mitt Romney and the deficit hawks have something to say when it comes down to very paltry amounts being delivered to an American population that is still desperately in need and largely still ignored by our governing bodies.
Yeah, my position would be I would actually like to see the checks go out to everybody and be a universal program. Then you can tax that back from people who make a lot of money and are doing just fine. But there's an important principle here with regards to universal programs. When you means test these things way down, what you end up doing is creating resentment from the people that are just above that income line. They say, well, look, I'm doing everything right. I'm working hard. Why is my neighbor getting this check and I'm not? So these people who are really encouraging the direction of Biden's buying into, we need to further means test these programs. These are people who don't really believe in government spending and are happy to see that type of resentment undercut any possibility of a social safety net.
That's absolutely right. And moreover, means testing takes time. We're talking about a population in crisis that is now going to have to wait longer as Congress people who are basically every single one of them at this point, millionaires, figure out how to exclude just enough people to make deficit hawks happy. So already we're talking about extending negotiations well into March. That's a very, very different conversation than we were having before the election when it was $2,000 out the door, quote, immediately.
Briahna, this is the thing, and just to return to the political consequences, I don't understand how they can see the current landscape and think that they will not pay a political price sometime in the future. And look, I'm coming from the right. I'm not saying that there's a lot of good faith actors in order to negotiate with, but people know that you have a majority. That's why they gave you the majority in the Senate. 1 week now to the day that the Democrats have won control of the Senate and the presidency, and substantively we have seen very little.
Yes, as Bernie Sanders has pointed out repeatedly, we could do this with budget reconciliation. We don't need to make these kinds of compromises with Republicans. Mitch McConnell has threatened that he is going to undo everything Democrats do the next time Republicans are in power if they push through. All of these kinds of threats are moot. We saw exactly how Republicans played this game over the past 4 years of Donald Trump's administration. I don't know why we're acting like we're reinventing the wheel. In fact, it should be Democrats that are playing hardball now that we have all of the power instead of anticipating some future date at which there might be retribution. There is a crisis right now in which Democrats could do something really novel, which is to demonstrate that they can help Republicans in need as well. There is this kind of toxic perception in American politics that these battle lines are hard drawn and that people care more about their partisan allegiances than actually getting things from the government that they need to survive. That might be the case, if only because people are so inured to the idea that the government can't and hasn't done anything for them in their lifetimes. Imagine what might happen if Democrats shirk those expectations and actually deliver on a promise at a moment when Americans need them more than they have historically.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And Bri, what does this episode tell you about how the rest of the Biden administration is likely to unfold? Because I feel like we're already seeing a pattern ultimately play out where one thing is promised and advertised, and then when you read into the details, it's a lot less than what they're actually saying. So I'll give you an example. There's a big executive order signed yesterday ending private prison contracts. But then even within that, you look at the details and it's like, okay, we're leaving out immigrant detention centers. This only actually applies to a very small percentage of the population. There's all these loopholes with the Buy American order. Okay, we're not really saying that you have to, all federal government contract, buy everything from within the United States. We're just changing some of the prioritization, some of the loopholes with the climate. I mean, every single thing has been like that. When you dig into the details, it's like a little bit less than what they're actually advertised, a little bit less than what was actually promised. Do you think that's basically going to be the story of this administration?
Yes, Crystal, because we don't have two parties in this country. We have one corporate party, and the fiction of there being some division between the two simply enables one to blame all of the failures of its own party on the other in a cyclical way that keeps us bouncing around and has millions and millions and millions of people caught in between. We were told in the lead up to the general election that we had to vote against Donald Trump because of the horrors of family separation, kids in detention centers, all of Trump's, openly bigoted immigration policies, and on and on and on. We were asked to forget the fact that those cages were built under the Barack Obama-Biden administration. And now what we're seeing is the kind of backpedaling and water treading that is the hallmark of a party that's less interested in making a kind of moral crusade to rectify and right the world, more so than a party that is like complicit in the exact kind of evils that we riled against under the Trump administration. And it's time for Democrats and Republicans alike to start holding their party more accountable if we ever want to see substantive change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Well said, my friend. Great to see you.
Thanks, Briahna.
Coming up, author Kurt Anderson is going to talk about his best-selling book, Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, Recent History. Really excited for this one when Rising returns.